Could you tell everybody that we try to make everything really easy? I mean, growing seedlings for people is just a small part of what's on that store. I mean, we have potting mix, raised bed mix, we have different kinds of compost tea. We have other amendments in addition. So if people want to talk to David, who's kind of in charge of the store, he can help them figure out what to get. And that, if people buy from Deep Roots, it allows us to provide more education and services. So we would appreciate it if, instead of just feeding the profits of the big box stores, that you could consider buying some stuff from the Deep Roots store. Mm-hmm. And we will personally consult with you about what to get and how to use it. Plus, some of this is not going to go on the mic, so you might want to repeat it a little bit. But why don't you just repeat what I just said just a little bit so we can hear it on the mic, on the video?
Yeah, so all Estelle is saying is that the Deep Roots project, for years now, has had a great deal of resources on their website, whether that's for compost, potting mix, mulch, compost tea. There's a lot of resource there. Is everyone familiar with the website? I highly recommend checking out what they have available.
And you only purchase online?
Or you could phone them. I mean, there's phone numbers of the folks that you could call as well.
The only thing that you have to purchase online is the seedlings. Everything else you can just call us up and you can just come get it, or we can drop it off and you can purchase any cash, check, or any other way. There's flyers here, but
Do you have a physical storefront somewhere in Elk Park?
We have no physical store. We have an online store, and we have David.
We have a truck, and I have my phone on me all the time, so if you want to call with any questions, I'll be happy to walk you through it. We offer delivery, and if you want to come and pick it up, we do work out of our homes here in Oak Park. So we've got a garage that we have a shop where we build the beds, and we store some of the soil, so you can come and get it if you want as well.
We build them custom. Like if somebody orders a 2x8 bed, we build a 2x8 bed. If they order a 4x8, we build that in my garage.
Please.
Question about raised beds,
Yeah.
the ones up there.
Yeah.
Over 2 or 3 years, the soil sinks, you have more on top. Do you have to be concerned about the soil compacting too much?
Not necessarily. If you were worried about that, or you saw the signs of, say, water pooling or not leaving in an appropriate amount of time, there would be no harm for you to, get in there with a pitchfork and just wiggle the pitchfork to kind of loosen it up a little bit. You don't really have to do much. One of my favorite tools that I used to use was called a broad fork, and it was about this wide, and you just put it down and stand on it, and then just wiggle it. But you can do the same thing with a regular pitchfork, digging fork, punch it in the ground and wiggle it, and start opening up those spaces for water and air to move. But I think that makes sense. If you have a heavy snowfall winter, things are going to settle, and so when you get back in there, if you loosen it up a little bit, you should be fine. So, please.
I wonder if you would comment on mixing any flowers with your garden in terms of pest control or prevention or any other issues like that.
I know people who are big fans of marigolds in the garden. That's about the only one that I could really speak to, and I have done that on a large scale. For the other plants, I wouldn't have any hesitation to do it, for planting any kind of a border, especially if it was, a prairie mix or something that's appropriate to the Midwest. But the only one I've ever really done that with is marigolds, and marigolds work great. They actually specifically do deter rabbits. So, please.
I have 2 things.
Uh-huh.
Number one, don't cheap out on your soil, because we did that in our raised bed and literally nothing grew.
Yeah.
Just because we bought the cheap soil from Jewel or something, and it was a disaster.
Yeah.
But secondly, if you have a raised bed on kind of a harder surface, how deep should that raised bed be? If you're going to grow tomatoes and beans and stuff like that.
So and I think you're kind of talking about if you had a raised bed over, say, asphalt or concrete or something like that. For something like tomatoes, they say a tomato in its ideal world, the roots will go down 9 feet. So, but who can do that? I would say that, if you have a minimum of a foot to a foot and a half, and at least the water can drain out of it, then you should be fine. And I think of it in terms of, if I were growing carrots, how big would I like them to get? So think in terms of carrot length or something that may grow under the ground, because it'll stop short when the soil ends, So, but I think a minimum of a foot to a foot and a half, you should be fine. And next, yes.
I just had a question about transplanting.
Yeah.
We've dabbled, and we've had some smaller pots and stuff, and I think our lawn service is blind or something because they've knocked stuff over and stuff is broken, and then we just have these dead little plantlings and we're throwing them out. So at what point is it okay? Do you think everything is still all right where you could conceivably transplant it and have it still grow as long as it's green?
I would say that if the plant isn't dried up, and usually they'll stay for, if they're totally uprooted but they have that root ball, they'll stay 2-3 days if they don't get dried out. But you should be okay. If you were to come across something and that the damage was done, say, a day or two ago, it might be all right. Yeah. Please.
Do you have any advice? I wanted to ask about a specific vegetable.
Okay.
We try to grow beets, and we get really nice beet greens, and we get little beets that are like this big, and I'm not sure what we're doing wrong. We have a raised bed.
Okay. My first guess, and you'll be able to shoot me down or agree with me right away, my first guess would be that there's not enough space, because if you have the greens are growing, the greens push each other out of the way. But if the plant itself the root itself is too small, you may not have enough nutrition right there to support the amount that you have. So with beets, if you were to try to space them, at least say 2 to 3 inches on each side, and then give them enough room to kind of grow between, so that each beet could theoretically, say, be the size of a tennis ball. I would try that first. I mean, do you feel like they were spaced closely in the past?
No, because we tried to spread them out.
Okay.
Because we've tried 2 or 3 years.
Okay, and how were they? But now, the greens that you grow, do they grow kind of high and wide, or? So do you have a nice?
They're nice bushy.
Nice bushy.
Really, they seem pretty.
So my second thought would be leave them in the ground longer.
Okay.
Yeah, because you have several different varieties of beets. Some of them are 50-day beets. Some of them might be 70 to 75-day. If you had a longer-term variety and it just didn't have enough time, but a lot of times, if you've got those great greens, the root will follow if you have the space. So, please.
Oh, in regard to the beets, because we grew them last year, could it be maybe a nitrogen imbalance? Are those plants that would grow nice leafy plants if they had a lot of nitrogen and not grow the...
I've never heard that before, and I've never heard of beets being a real heavy nitrogen feeder. They're not real specific. I don't know, though. I would kind of have to see what the plant's doing to kind of know where to investigate that. But I've never heard of a nitrogen problem with beets. Certainly not like tomatoes or something like that. Please.
Going back to the raised beds, if you're putting a raised beds over a yard space, like putting in a new raised bed, first of all, how deep does that need to be? And secondly, do you need to take the sod off the ground first?
So you don't need to take this. Pardon? So what she was asking was, if you've constructed a raised bed to go over your yard space, do you necessarily need to remove the sod? And how deep would you have to do it? So if you were doing it over yard space, my ideal height for a raised bed, generally when I construct them, is right around 18 inches. It's a nice workable height. You get plenty of soil in there, but I always leave a couple inches of gravel in the bottom for the water to have somewhere to go. If you were planting over grass, I would worry about drainage because that water is going to flow down, hit the grass, and it may stop. Or it may not percolate as quickly as you would want it to. But you wouldn't necessarily have to remove the sod if you were putting a layer of gravel in there. The sod will break down over the course of your first growing season. And then that layer of sod and roots, there's a lot of nutrition there. So after that first season, it's not even an issue until you move the bed, and then you have to figure out how to replant that. But please.
Back to the squirrels.
Uh-huh.
Other than putting your bags over your tomatoes or whatever, have you had any luck with doing any sort of netting over the plants? I mean, I think I've scoured every single post on Pinterest, sadly, to see if I could do PVC piping with netting, but I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah. The first thing that I would try, and I had mentioned this earlier, is what they call row cover. It's a spun-bound polypropylene fabric that lets light and water through, but nothing else can get through it. And it's cheap. You can buy it in 4-foot long roll or 4-foot wide rolls, for under $20, and no squirrel's going to bother with it. If you were to have it ready to go when you saw that you might be needing it, like if you do have tomatoes or something like that, I would think it would do the trick. And, when I was growing on a larger scale, I never had animal problems with anything that was ever under row cover. I think it might be difficult for them to see. Please.
So if you do it with PVC pipe, then you've already started your season extension, because then you can cover it with some visqueen at the beginning of the year or the end of the year to extend your growing season.
Okay.
So that way you can get an advantage out of it all season.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Please.
Thank you. Talk about what lovely things like to eat sweet peas as they're budding up, because I thought I had it all set for the rabbits and the squirrels and the anything else. Something else is eating our sweet peas.
I think birds are.
Birds.
Yeah. Yeah, I would be thinking birds too.
Really?
Especially when they're kind of smaller and really tender. Yeah. Yeah. Please.
So I have an already existing raised bed, which doesn't have gravel underneath it.
Okay.
I put landscape fabric and chicken wire, animals. So is there anything I should do other than take out my soil and put gravel on to ensure the drainage?
Have you had water issues with it in the past?
No.
Then I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
One thing that you could think about doing is, you could add sand to your soil mix that you have there, just to have kind of large particle in there to increase drainage.
Okay, just mix it in.
Yeah, you could do that. Or, if you were able to move the soil over to one side, add some gravel, cover it, move it to the,
Okay.
But if you're already draining, that's kind of like if it's not broke,
Sure.
I think that's cool.
Okay.
Okay.